Hello everyone. Not every fall begins with a slip. Sometimes it begins with a smile and a single step in the wrong direction. He didn't run toward his downfall, he walked, slowly, believing every step was progress. The most dangerous roads are not the ones lined with warning signs. They are the ones that feel safe at the start. A man does not lose everything in one day. He loses it in pieces, one compromise at a time. Sometimes the greatest traps in life are disguised as invitations to walk together. Life has a strange way of showing us the truth. Sometimes it doesn't come with thunder. It comes with a quiet walk. A decision so simple that it changes everything. He thought he was walking toward love. He thought he had found someone who would lift him up, stand beside him, and make his world brighter. But that single walk, the moment he chose to leave behind his principles, his values, and the people who truly cared for him, that walk became the first step toward his own downfall. It wasn't her name that mattered. It wasn't even the person. It was the choice to be blinded by desire, to ignore the warning signs, to silence the voice of wisdom within. At first it looked like victory. He walked away proudly, believing he had won the world. But slowly the cracks began to appear. The friends he once trusted drifted away. The respect he had built over years started to crumble, and the man he once was disciplined, strong, and full of purpose became a shadow of himself. This isn't just a story about a relationship. This is about the decisions we make when our hearts overpower our minds. It's about how one wrong turn, one step off the path of integrity, can lead us down a road we never thought we'd walk. Every step that man took wasn't toward love. It was away from his values. Every compromise he made for temporary comfort was a brick removed from the foundation of his future. And the higher he thought he was climbing, the deeper he was falling. When we walk away from the principles that protect us, we don't realize what we're losing until it's gone. Sometimes the most dangerous walk isn't into the battlefield, it's into someone's illusion. So learn from his story. Do not let emotions blind your vision. Do not let the temporary shine of something new make you abandon what is eternal. One walk can change your destiny. Choose your direction wisely. When we hear a story like this, our first instinct is to search for someone to blame. We want to point a finger to say it was because of her, or it was because of him. But the truth is far more confronting. It's not about a person's name, it's about the choices we make in the moments when our hearts are louder than our reason. Names are distractions. They allow us to shift the weight of our mistakes onto someone else, as if they carried us into the storm. But no one can walk us into the fire unless we first take that step ourselves. The real story isn't about her. It's about the decision he made when he let desire outweigh discipline, when he let a fleeting feeling overpower the voice of his own conscience. Because every fall starts quietly. Not with a push from another person, but with a private surrender the moment we choose the easy path over the right one. He didn't trip because someone held his hand. He stumbled because he loosened his grip on his own principles. And that is the truth many refuse to accept, that the downfall of a man is rarely written by another person's name. It is written by the ink of his own choices. If you remove the name, the story remains the same. A person who once had clarity let his heart drag him away from the light he had followed for years. A person who once stood firm on values began to shift his steps for something that glittered in the moment. It is in those choices, not in the presence of another, that the seeds of a fall are planted. And as we reflect on that, we realize how often in life we blame the wrong thing. We blame the face, the circumstance, the temptation, when in reality, the turning point always comes from within. A man's ruin is not hidden in the steps of another person. It hides in the moments he allows himself to silence his own wisdom. The story teaches us that no matter how much we try to rewrite our past by mentioning someone's name, by saying it was their influence, by arguing that it was beyond our control. The truth will always return to this: the direction we walk in life is drawn not by the people beside us, but by the decisions we allow ourselves to make. There is something quietly dangerous about the first step we take away from the values that once held us upright. It never looks like a collapse in the beginning. It looks like a small compromise, a harmless choice, an adjustment that feels too minor to matter. But principles are like the roots of a great tree. You don't see them, yet they hold everything above the ground. The moment we start walking away from them, we begin to loosen the soil that anchors us, and the tilt begins before the fall is even visible. The man in the story didn't lose everything in a single moment. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to let go of his strength. It began when he chose to take that first walk, a walk that required him to leave behind the code he once swore he would never abandon. Principles don't shout, they whisper. They do not chain you, they guide you. And when you walk away from them, the world doesn't warn you with thunder. It tempts you with silence, almost as if the universe is testing how far you're willing to drift. At first, leaving those principles feels liberating. You convince yourself you've outgrown them, that they were old-fashioned, that they were holding you back from happiness. But in truth, they were the quiet guards at the gates of your dignity. Each step away weakens something unseen: your self-respect, your discipline, your clarity. You still walk tall for a while because the cracks are invisible, but deep down the foundations start to tremble. The tragedy of walking away from principles is that the world often applauds you in the beginning. You receive praise for being bold, for choosing your heart over your mind, for breaking boundaries. Yet the applause is only for the surface, not for the soul. Principles are what give you weight. They keep you grounded when the winds of temptation blow hardest. Once you start walking away, you might feel lighter, but that lightness is only because you're slowly losing the very things that kept you rooted. And the most painful part is that the first few steps rarely feel wrong. You still smile, you still convince yourself it's just a new path, a different choice. But somewhere in the distance, the horizon begins to shift. The future that once seemed certain starts to blur. Because when you let go of your principles, you don't just change your direction, you slowly become someone you no longer recognize. People often think the fall comes from an outside push, but it's almost always the result of small, silent departures from the values that once defined us. That is why the first walk away is so dangerous. It rarely looks like a step toward ruin, but it is always the beginning of a journey that. Desire is one of the most deceptive forces in human life. It does not come crashing down like a storm. It slips in quietly like a soft wind, whispering that what you want is harmless, that what you feel is too powerful to resist. And in that whisper lies its danger, because desire rarely asks for your reason's permission. It knows how to bypass the gates of logic and speak straight to the heart, convincing you that your longing is proof of your destiny. He was not foolish in the beginning. He was merely human. He saw something that lit a spark inside him, a spark so bright it made everything else look dim in comparison. And that is how desire blinds. It doesn't take away your sight, it narrows your vision. You no longer see the full picture. You see only the glow of the thing you want. The warnings, the wisdom of years, the lessons learned from others' mistakes, all of it fades like distant echoes. In that narrow tunnel of longing, the voice of caution begins to sound like an enemy, and the only voice that feels like a friend is the one that urges you forward. Good judgment is not lost overnight, it is overshadowed. Every step guided by desire feels justified because desire dresses itself in promises of happiness, of fulfillment, of escape from the ordinary. He told himself he was following his heart, that he was choosing courage over fear, that he was stepping into a new chapter of life. But courage without wisdom is just another form of recklessness. And a new chapter built on denial of truth is nothing more than the preface to a tragedy. The strange thing about desire is that it often imitates clarity. It gives you a sense of purpose, as if you finally know what you want. But in reality, it only sharpens your focus on what you think will complete you, while dulling your awareness of the cost. It blinds you to the sacrifices you are about to make, the friends you might lose, the respect you may forfeit, the dignity you risk trading for a fleeting moment of satisfaction. And the more you give in, the more you begin to confuse desire with destiny, as though the strength of your craving proves the rightness of your path. He didn't stop to question why his decisions began to feel rushed, why his nights were filled with both hope and unease, why his inner peace, that quiet compass that once guided his steps, had started to go silent. That is how desire works. It makes you run faster toward what you crave, so you don't have time to pause and notice what you are leaving behind. It's not that wisdom disappears, it's that you no longer want to hear it. And the longer you chase, the deeper you sink into the illusion that the very thing leading you astray is the only thing worth pursuing. There is a kind of blindness that does not close your eyes but clouds your discernment. You can still see the path, but you stop seeing the edges where the ground begins to crumble. You keep telling yourself that you are in control, that you can stop whenever you want, that you know where this is leading, and yet each step you take is no longer a choice guided by reason, but a pull dictated by longing. Desire has a way of convincing even the wisest minds that they are immune to its trap, that they can dance on the edge of a cliff without ever losing their balance, until one day they look back and realize the ground they trusted has already disappeared beneath their feet. The first warning sign is rarely loud. It is often just a small unease, a fleeting pause in the heart, a quiet voice that says, "Something is not as it seems." But we learn to silence that voice because it is inconvenient, because it interrupts the sweetness of the moment, because it forces us to face a truth we are not ready to accept. And so, the first warning is dismissed as overthinking, the second as unnecessary fear, the third as something that can be managed later, until the pattern of dismissal becomes the beginning of regret. He did not walk blindly into his downfall. Long before his steps carried him to the edge, the signs were there, a shift in the tone of conversations, a growing distance from the friends who once held him accountable, a subtle discomfort that crept in when he had to justify his choices to himself. All of these were gentle lights blinking in the darkness, trying to signal a change in direction. But the tragedy of the human heart is that we see warning signs most clearly only in hindsight, when the road back has already grown longer than the road ahead. Ignoring a warning sign is not just a single decision. It is a habit formed by the need to protect the story we want to believe. When we desire something strongly enough, every warning begins to look like an obstacle rather than a guide. We call it negativity, we call it doubt, we call it lack of faith, anything but what it truly is, a signal that we are steering away from wisdom. And each time we push that signal aside, the next one becomes easier to ignore, until the very act of listening to our conscience feels foreign. There is a strange comfort in denial. It allows us to move forward without interruption, to keep the illusion intact for just a little longer. He told himself that the unease he felt was temporary, that the people who cautioned him simply did not understand, that the small cracks in his peace were nothing more than the price of change. Yet those cracks were the earliest signs of the collapse to come. The more he ignored them, the deeper they spread beneath the surface, invisible but relentless, turning solid ground into fragile soil. What makes warning signs so easy to dismiss is that they rarely present themselves as dramatic events. They often come in whispers: a late night doubt, an awkward silence after a certain choice, a small sacrifice of principle that leaves a faint sting of guilt. Individually, they feel too minor to change course for, but collectively they are the map we need to read. By the time the signs grow loud enough to demand attention, the path they pointed away from has already faded behind us. And yet, there is always a moment of final hesitation, a last quiet chance when the heart senses the danger, even if the mind refuses to acknowledge it. That moment, so often overlooked, becomes the point of no return. It is in that hesitation, in that breath of unease before the decisive step, that the soul whispers its last warning. But if we have trained ourselves not to listen, if we have grown accustomed to brushing off every inner alarm as a mere distraction, then even that last whisper becomes nothing more than background noise against the louder pull of desire. And so the walk continues. The signs keep flashing in their silent language. The conscience keeps knocking softly at the closed door of awareness. And the one who walks on believes that nothing is wrong, that the path is his to shape, even as each ignored signal quietly shifts the ground beneath his feet. There is a certain illusion about success that makes it so seductive. We are taught to celebrate the outcome, the applause, the recognition, the sense of having made it. What we are rarely taught is to question how it was built. And so, when the road to achievement demands that we bend a principle just a little, we convince ourselves it is harmless. We say it is only temporary, that we can always return to our old standards later, that the small compromise is a necessary step towards something greater. But success that grows out of compromise is like a castle built on sand. It may rise quickly and look impressive in the sunlight, yet beneath its weight the ground is already shifting. The man in the story believed his new path was progress. He saw the early signs of gain, attention, comfort, the thrill of feeling desired, the warmth of an unfamiliar approval. It looked like success because it gave him what he thought he had been missing. But success built by walking away from his true self was not a sign of growth. It was the beginning of erosion. Every principle he traded for convenience was another stone removed from the foundation that once made him steady. And though the walls still stood for a while, their roots were hollowed out, waiting for the inevitable moment when the weight above would become too heavy for the empty ground below. There is a quiet cost to every compromise that we often fail to count. It is not always measured in money or status. It is measured in the slow loss of peace. You cannot purchase back the trust you lose in yourself. You cannot recover the clarity that slips away each time you convince yourself that a small betrayal of your values will go unnoticed. The world may still praise you, the mirror may still show the same face, but something beneath the surface begins to fracture. And that fracture, though invisible at first, widens with each new choice that favors immediate gain over enduring integrity. The tragedy of such success is that it often comes with early rewards that silence the warnings. The applause of others drowns out the whisper of conscience. You tell yourself that the results prove the choice was right, that the recognition you receive is a sign you were justified. But results can be deceiving. They can make the hollow road beneath your feet feel solid, as if the early steps have already secured your future. In truth, what feels like triumph is often only the calm before the collapse. Compromise rarely asks for everything at once. It asks for one principle today, another tomorrow. It convinces you that it is reasonable, that it is a fair trade for the happiness you seek. But the more often you agree, the further you drift from the person you once promised yourself you would always be. And success achieved at the cost of that promise is never as bright as it first appears. Its light fades quickly, leaving behind the shadow of the person you lost in the pursuit. And yet, There is a strange comfort in this kind of success. It offers quick proof of progress, the praise of strangers, the sense of moving forward, the illusion of control. It allows you to postpone the reckoning with your own heart because the world seems to be rewarding you. But the heart keeps its own ledger, one that does not forget. Every shortcut leaves an entry in that ledger, and sooner or later, the weight of those unaccounted debts begins to press against the very walls you built with such urgency. It is in that slow, unseen pressure that the fragility of such success reveals itself. For no matter how high the tower rises, if its base is made of bargains with your own conscience, then every new stone added above only increases the strain below. And as the strain grows, the smiles begin to feel forced, the applause starts to sound hollow, and the person who once felt triumphant begins to sense quietly that the ground on which he stands is no longer as firm as it once seemed. Strength is often misunderstood. We mistake it for the power to conquer others, for the ability to win arguments, to hold attention, to bend circumstances in our favor. But that kind of strength is fragile. It depends on the noise around us. The moment the crowd turns away, the moment the praise stops, it begins to crumble. True strength does not come from the approval of others, nor from the emotions that flare up in moments of passion. It comes from something quieter, the discipline to stay anchored when the winds of desire try to pull you adrift, the commitment to hold fast to your values when everything else tempts you to let go. Discipline is the unseen armor of a person. It does not glitter like charm. It does not roar like anger. It does not dazzle like charisma. It works in silence, shaping the choices you make long before those choices face the world's judgment. A disciplined heart does not need to wrestle with every impulse. It knows which impulses are worth resisting and which are worth pursuing. That is why discipline and values are the true foundation of enduring strength. They give you the clarity to act with purpose even when your emotions demand otherwise. Emotions are powerful, but they are also restless. They rise and fall like the tides. They can turn warmth into coldness, confidence into doubt, love into bitterness. A person who builds his steps on emotions alone builds a path that shifts beneath his feet. For what feels right in the rush of the moment can often look like betrayal when the moment has passed. And yet, so many mistake the intensity of a feeling for the certainty of truth, as if the depth of an emotion guarantees the wisdom of the choice it inspired. The man in the story believed his emotions were proof of his courage. He thought that following the pull of his heart made him brave, that giving in to what he felt was a sign of authenticity. But bravery is not found in surrendering to impulses. It is found in standing firm against them when they lead you away from what you know is right. Emotions are fleeting. They can guide, but they cannot be the compass. Values, on the other hand, remain steady through the storms, quietly reminding you of who you are meant to be even when the world around you changes. There is a certain quiet dignity in a person who is guided by discipline. Such a person does not need to raise his voice to prove his resolve, nor does he need to chase the approval of others to validate his path. His strength is not in the momentary surge of passion, but in the calm refusal to abandon what he knows to be true. He can feel deeply, yet he does not let his feelings dictate the course of his life. And that balance, the coexistence of depth of feeling with steadiness of principle, is what separates enduring strength from the fragile power that emotions alone can offer. The tragedy of losing discipline is that it rarely happens in a single dramatic collapse. It slips away quietly, often disguised as freedom. You tell yourself you are following your heart, that you are breaking free from the chains of restraint, that you are choosing authenticity over rigidity. But with each step away from discipline, a small piece of your inner strength loosens, until one day you find that you no longer stand as firmly as you once did. And by the time you realize that your emotions have begun to lead you, rather than the other way around, you have already walked far from the solid ground you once stood upon. The world often praises those who follow their hearts, but it rarely acknowledges that the heart itself needs guidance. A river without its banks becomes a flood, and emotions without the boundaries of discipline can sweep a person into places he never meant to go. The quiet strength of discipline is not the suppression of feelings, it is their proper direction. It is the ability to say yes to what aligns with your deeper values and no to what only feeds a temporary craving. It is the unseen force that holds a person together when every impulse demands that he let go. And the more you look at the patterns of those who endure, the more you realize that it was never their emotions that kept them steady, it was the values they refused to trade, the discipline they refused to surrender. Because emotions, no matter how intense, will fade, and when they fade, if nothing stronger remains beneath them, everything they built begins to fade as well. Yet the one who roots his strength in discipline stands even when the waves of feeling rise and crash against him, for his footing is not in the water, but in the bedrock beneath. The most dangerous turn in a person's journey rarely announces itself with thunder. It begins in silence, often with a choice that feels so small, so harmless, that you convince yourself it cannot possibly matter. It might come as a moment of curiosity, a gesture of kindness that blurs into something more, a decision you justify with the words, "just this once." It feels safe because it does not look like a fall. It looks like discovery. It even carries a strange sense of excitement, as if you are stepping into something new, something more alive than the steady rhythm of the path you've always known. That is the first illusion of the wrong path. It does not begin with fear. It begins with fascination. It offers you a spark, a sense of freshness, an escape from the familiar discipline that once felt like a burden. The moment you take that first step, you feel lighter because you believe you are freeing yourself. You mistake the loosening of your guardrails for the feeling of growth, when in truth, it is only the first slide away from the ground that once held you steady. He too believed that the first step was harmless. It was only a walk, a conversation, a glance, a choice to silence his doubts just for one moment. He told himself it was not a betrayal of who he was not yet. But that is the quiet danger of beginnings. They rarely show you their destination. A single step taken in the wrong direction may feel insignificant, but every road, no matter how long, begins with that single shift of footing. Excitement has a way of disguising itself as clarity. The rush of the new can make the old seem dull, the voice of caution seem unnecessary, the memory of lessons learned seem outdated. You start to believe that what feels good must be good, that the thrill of breaking a boundary is proof that you are discovering your true self. But often the very things that thrill us at first are the ones that lead us farthest from who we were meant to be. There is a peculiar blindness that comes with that first step. You do not yet feel the loss, so you tell yourself there will be none. You do not yet see the distance growing between you and your principles, so you believe there is no real danger. The path ahead still looks familiar, only brighter, only more alive. But what you do not realize is that every small turn shifts the horizon, and though the road beneath your feet still feels steady, it is quietly bending toward a destination you cannot yet imagine. It is in these early moments, the seemingly harmless choices, that the greatest battles of character are fought and often lost. For once the first step has been taken, the next feels easier, and then the next even easier still. You begin to adjust to the new direction without noticing how far you have already drifted. The small compromise that once made you hesitate becomes the new normal, and from there, The line you swore you would never cross no longer looks as distant as it once did. Excitement also carries with it a subtle kind of pride. You tell yourself that you are brave for breaking the routine, bold for defying the warnings, wise for listening to your feelings. You believe you are taking control of your story when, in fact, you are surrendering control to an impulse disguised as freedom. And the more thrilling that first step feels, the more it dulls your memory of the discipline that once protected you. The beginnings of many downfalls are often wrapped in moments that felt like triumph at the time. That is why the first step is so deceptive. It does not feel like a descent. It feels like an ascent. You feel as if you are moving forward, when in reality you are simply stepping onto a slope too subtle to notice. And the slope is gentle enough at first that you can convince yourself there is no danger, that you can stop whenever you choose, that you can always turn back if needed. But as each step carries you farther, the distance to turn back grows. The familiar landmarks of your old path start to fade behind you. The voice that once cautioned you grows quieter with every compromise, until one day it sounds like a distant echo you barely recognize. And in that silence, in that rush of newness that once felt like freedom, you fail to notice that the road beneath you is no longer level, that the ground itself has begun to slope downward, drawing you gently yet steadily toward a place you never planned to go. A person's foundation is not built in a single day. It is formed slowly, almost invisibly, through years of choices, sacrifices, and quiet refusals to surrender what is right for what is easy. That foundation is made of habits, of values held onto even when they felt heavy, of small decisions to keep walking the harder road because it was the honest one. It does not announce itself with fanfare, it simply holds you steady when the winds of life blow. But like the roots of a tree buried deep in the soil, it is most vulnerable not to sudden storms but to slow erosion, to the quiet compromises that eat away at it bit by bit. The tragedy of temporary comfort is that it feels harmless at first. You tell yourself it is only a small departure, only for today, only until things get easier. You promise yourself that you will return to the higher standard you once lived by, once you have caught your breath, once the pressure has passed. And so you take the comfort that asks you to loosen your grip on your principles just a little, only for now. But comfort has a way of asking for more, because the moment you taste the relief it offers, the discipline you once valued begins to feel unnecessary, even burdensome. He did not set out to destroy his own foundation. No one ever does. He simply told himself that a small step away from his former discipline would not harm him, that saying yes to something that promised peace, even at the cost of a small compromise, was a reasonable exchange. He believed he could always return to the path of integrity later, that his foundation was strong enough to withstand a few cracks. What he did not see was that every compromise, however small, was like removing a single stone from the base of a wall. One stone seems insignificant. Even 2 or 3 may appear harmless, but as the stones disappear, the weight above them begins to shift, and the wall that once stood unshakable grows weaker with each unnoticed loss. Temporary comfort rarely feels like a danger because it does not demand a grand betrayal. It simply asks for a slight adjustment, a gentle lowering of your standards, a quiet silencing of your inner caution. It soothes you with the thought that you deserve a break from the strain of discipline, that a moment of ease will not undo the years you spent building your strength. And in that reasoning lies its most subtle harm. It convinces you to trade a piece of your foundation for a fleeting sense of relief. The truth about foundations is that they do not collapse overnight. They crumble silently, long before anyone notices the cracks. The world still sees the strong walls above, still hears the confident voice, still applauds the apparent success. But beneath the surface, the compromises have already loosened the structure, and what once could bear the weight of storms now begins to strain under its own weight. The lure of temporary comfort is not only in the relief it brings, but in the permission it grants. Each time you give in, it becomes easier to believe that you can do so again without consequence. You start to convince yourself that your strength lies in your ability to recover later, not realizing that with each compromise you are not merely bending, you are changing the very shape of the foundation you stand upon. And so the man walked further, each step feeling as if it carried no cost, each small comfort seeming justified in the moment. He could still look in the mirror and see the same face, still speak the words of strength, still believe that his foundation was intact. But the ground beneath was no longer the same. It had begun to shift, to soften, to lose the firmness that once gave him certainty. And as he continued to trade small pieces of his deeper self for the ease of the moment, he did not see that the weight of his own life was slowly pressing against a foundation that had grown more fragile than it appeared. Pride has a strange way of disguising itself. It does not always roar or demand applause. Sometimes it whispers quietly in your ear, telling you that you are strong enough to handle what you're walking into, that you do not need to pause or seek counsel, that the warnings others gave were for people weaker than you. It becomes a gentle yet persistent voice that convinces you that your judgment is sharper than the lessons of experience, that your insight is deeper than the caution of those who stood at the edge and turned back. For him, pride did not arrive as arrogance, not at first. It came as a sense of certainty, a quiet but steady confidence that he understood his situation better than anyone else could. He believed that because his intentions were good, his path would remain safe. He told himself that what had led others to stumble would not ensnare him. He wore his self-control like a shield and thought it unbreakable, never realizing that pride itself had begun to slip through the cracks. There is a subtle danger in believing you are too wise to fall. It is like walking across a frozen lake, hearing the faint creaks beneath your feet, but assuring yourself that the ice will not break for you because you are careful, because your steps are deliberate. You think the danger lies only in recklessness, not in overconfidence, but the truth is that the ice does not care how confident you are. It responds only to the weight it bears. Pride blinds you to that weight, to how heavy the quiet compromises, the unspoken thoughts, the small concessions become as they gather, one after another, beneath the surface. He began to mistake momentum for strength. The more he walked down that path, the more certain he felt that he was in control. Every step he took without consequence seemed to prove him right. Each time he ignored a small warning and nothing collapsed immediately, his confidence grew. But pride often feeds on delayed consequences. The absence of immediate fallout feels like proof that all is well, when in reality it is only the calm before the inevitable fracture. Pride also distorts the way we perceive cost. It does not deny that there is a price to pay. Rather, it convinces you that the price is small, almost insignificant, compared to the reward you believe you are gaining. It tells you that you can afford it, that the strength of your foundation is enough to carry the burden. But the cost of certain choices is never fully visible at the beginning. It is paid in increments, sometimes so gradually that you do not notice what you are losing until you reach for it one day and find it gone. For him, pride did not look like boastful words or defiance against all who cared. It looked like quiet dismissal, dismissing advice as unnecessary, dismissing doubts as weakness, dismissing the slow unease within as mere overthinking. In doing so, he closed the door on the very humility that could have saved him. He failed to see that humility is not a lack of strength, but the presence of clear vision. It allows a person to pause, to reconsider, to admit that the path ahead is not as safe as it appears. And so, as he walked further, pride became the lens through which he interpreted everything. When others cautioned him, he saw them as fearful or too rigid to understand the depth of his conviction. When the first cracks appeared beneath his feet, he explained them away as ordinary challenges. He told himself that every cost he had paid so far was worth it, that the discomfort was simply part of the journey. What he did not realize was that pride had already begun to blind him to the real danger, not the storm ahead, but the weakening of the ground beneath him. Pride in its most dangerous form is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, steady, almost reasonable. It tells you that you are simply being courageous when in truth you are being careless. It tells you that your path is unique, that the rules which apply to others do not quite apply to you. It convinces you that the warnings you hear are echoes of other people's fears, not signals of real risks. It whispers that you have not yet fallen, therefore you will not fall, and in that whisper lies the slow and patient blindness that draws a person deeper into the very danger they once thought themselves too strong to face. The strange thing about decline is that it rarely introduces itself as decline. It does not arrive wearing the face of danger or carrying the weight of warning. More often than not, it greets you like an ally, a gentle voice promising growth, a door that looks like an opportunity, a road that feels like forward motion. It begins not with a fall, but with what appears to be a step upward. He did not feel as though he was stepping into danger. In fact, the first steps felt like awakening. It seemed as if he was finally discovering a part of himself he had kept locked away for too long. The world around him seemed to respond to his choices with approval, a nod here, a smile there, a sense of being seen and understood in ways he had quietly longed for. And because the first steps seemed to bring light instead of shadows, he convinced himself that he was, in fact, moving forward. That is how the path often begins, with a subtle promise that this new direction will fill the emptiness left by years of restraint, that it will offer a sense of vitality he thought he had lost, that it will finally answer the questions he had been too cautious to ask. Each step forward felt like shedding a weight, loosening a chain, stepping out of a dimly lit room into an open field. How could he not see it as progress when it felt like freedom? What he could not see was that not all movement is progress. A boat that drifts with the current moves swiftly, but not always toward the shore. A climber descending a slope feels the relief of easier steps without realizing that the mountain's base is drawing nearer than the summit. The measure of progress is not the ease of the path or the thrill of the moment, it is the direction in which those steps carry you. But when the path is lined with things that seem good, the difference between ascent and descent becomes difficult to discern. Each step along that path carried with it a subtle exchange, a piece of discipline for a spark of comfort, a sliver of caution for a taste of belonging, a fragment of principle for the feeling of being alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. None of these trades seemed catastrophic at the time. Each felt like an acceptable cost for the sense of renewal he believed he was gaining. And so the path, which in truth was a slow decline, wore the mask of progress. The first turns never looked like detours. The early decisions did not look like compromises. The beginnings of loss felt instead like gains. This is how the road to downfall often deceives. It meets you not with a wall, but with a welcome. It does not strike you with immediate loss, but offers you what looks like new life. It does not ask you to run into the storm. It invites you to walk in what appears to be gentler weather. It lets you believe that you are wiser now, freer now, more in touch with the deeper truths of your own heart. And in that belief lies the first quiet fracture, the shift from caution to self-assurance, from humility to unguarded trust in one's own impulses. In the early stretches of his walk, he felt lighter, almost triumphant. He told himself that he was finally moving beyond the limitations that had once held him back. When friends questioned him, he answered with the confidence of one who believes he has outgrown their warning. When doubt crept in during the quiet moments, he silenced it with the thought that growth often feels uncomfortable at first. What he did not recognize was that growth may be uncomfortable, but so too is the first tearing of something that once held firm. The road that leads downward is rarely steep at the start. It is gentle, almost inviting. It does not demand leaps of defiance, but only small steps of acquiescence. And each small step feels so reasonable, so harmless, that by the time you realize how far you have descended, the climb back feels impossibly long. But in those early steps, there is no sense of danger, only the heady feeling that life is finally moving, that something within is finally awakening. He did not see that what felt like doors opening were in fact walls crumbling. He mistook the loosening of restraint for the gaining of freedom, not knowing that certain restraints are not chains but anchors. He felt as though he was stepping forward into new ground, never suspecting that the ground itself was growing less solid beneath his feet. The sense of forward motion blinded him to the subtle shift in terrain from firm earth to loose soil, from the solid stone of conviction to the soft sand of compromise. And so the path continued not as a sudden fall, but as a steady walk that felt almost like a climb. The more he walked, the more convinced he became that he was moving towards something higher, richer, more meaningful. Each milestone on the way seemed to affirm his belief that he was progressing. Yet with every step, though unseen, a small measure of what once held him steady was quietly being left behind. The first step that feels harmless often becomes the step you can never take back. Every downfall begins as a choice that looked like freedom. The road that feels like progress can lead you away from everything that once made you strong. A heart can be conquered not by force, but by a gentle whisper that says, "You deserve this." We don't wake up fallen, we drift there slowly because we stopped paying attention to where we were going. It was never the walk that betrayed him, it was the choices he made with each step. He learned too late that every easy step forward can carry you further from the ground you thought you stood on. What looks like progress today can be the very road that costs you everything tomorrow. Remember this, the path to a fall never feels like a fall until you've already hit the ground. And so, when at last he reached the end of that walk, he looked back and could hardly recognize the road he had traveled. What had begun with the promise of new life had led him to a place where the pillars of his character were fractured, where the trust he once inspired had been spent, and where the strength that once kept him standing had quietly ebbed away. He finally understood that a man rarely falls in a single step. He falls by walking a path that, from the beginning, appeared harmless, even hopeful. The downfall was not born in the moment of collapse, it was sown in the first decision to ignore the voice of caution, in the first compromise made for a fleeting comfort, in the first proud thought that he was too strong to stumble. This is the warning his story leaves us with. Beware of the road that feels like progress but leads you away from your foundation. Beware of the comfort that asks you to trade your integrity for relief. Beware of the pride that whispers you are different, that you are immune to the cost others have paid. For in the end, the walk that seemed so small at its beginning became the very road that led his undoing. And the lesson is not about her, or about anyone else, it is about how easily we can be lured by the feeling of moving forward, while each step quietly carries us closer to the edge.